different programs and attempts and tries. I think it was my personal physical and spiritual exhaustion, and I ran out of money and had accomplished nothing. And finally, around mid-2005, I stopped at I had communities kind of around East Africa where I'd go to stay, because they got to know me. It's where I knew all the widows and orphans and all the people in the village, and they called me Mwazungu Liziru, which it means crazy white man. Only a crazy white man would travel alone into, I traveled really from Nairobi to Cape Town over those years. And so I came to the village, Nyamusi in it's in Kenya, in western Kenya actually, not far from Lake Victoria, and stopped there to rest for a few days. And my friend who I usually stayed with in that village came to me and said, we're so glad you're here. We heard you were coming, and we're having a meeting today. We'd like you to come. So I said, great, and Africans will celebrate anything. And I went to the meeting, and in the meeting how many of you have been to Africa and actually been in a village? So you kind of probably know what I'm talking about here, but you come and they start singing, and they're great singers, they really are, and they just kind of, as the noise elevates, that's how people know there's something going on. So it'll take 2 or 3 hours to kind of get everybody together. And so I'm just sitting there, and I'm just kind of enjoying it, and greeting people I hadn't seen in a long time. And finally said, "So what's the event?" He said, "Oh, it's you." And I said, great. I said, "So why are we here?" He said, "I've invited all the widows in the village to come." He said, "Because we're having a special speaker." And I said, "Really, who?" It's you.
A crazy white man.
The crazy white guy. And I really am. I've been airlifted out twice. Once out of Sudan, the Marines were mobilized to get me out of there. And, I've been through some massacres and civil wars, and I'll just go anywhere. I rarely worry about anything, but I've got great stories. It's been a deep and rich life. And so I'm sitting there thinking, okay, what are we talking about? He said, "Your new program." And I said, "What program?" And he said, "Well, remember we met a year ago," because he had this idea that Africans didn't need help, with donors. And we were talking about it a year earlier, and I had written down some things, and he had written down some things, and we had gotten together, and we'd written down very similar things about what we thought the way things should work, which is what everybody does, by the way. That's why nothing works in Africa. And because we develop our idea and our plan, and then we go there. And because we're white and we're Americans, and we think, that we have all the good ideas. And I said, "Well, that's great. So what program?" And he said, "You were going to start the village program, and to care for widows and orphans." And I said, "Oh, that's right." I said, "Sure, I'm ready for that. Let's do it." So I got up, when it was time, and I said, "Look," I said, "I got to be honest with you guys. I've known you for years now, and I've been in your homes, and we've become good friends." And I said, "I've got to tell you that I don't know what to do. I'm out of money, and we've tried programs here in this community that they last as long as I keep paying for them." And I thought I was doing everything different, just like everybody else thinks. And we all start using different language. The new language of the UN and USAID is sustainability and capital development and capacity building and all of that. It's all bullshit, because they do exactly the same thing they've done for the last 50 years. So, and I was doing it too and didn't even realize it. So, but that's what people do. They build a belief system around this time it's different. And it's so fragmented, in Africa, that it's easy for that to happen, because it's rare for a donor to actually ever arrive and see something. And when they do, it's rare for them to ever come back again. And that was the difference, is that for 5 years I had tried and then kept going back and measuring the results and realizing that we were actually deepening the levels of poverty. We weren't creating any relief at all. And So I said, you know, kind of narrowed it down. Had 130 widows there. And I said, you know, I have to be honest. You know, I worked in college. I worked nights when I put myself through college. And I cleaned toilets and stuff. And I mentioned that to him. Told him about kind of my background. A lot of them had never heard about me, you know. And there was just like this dead silence, you know, in the room. And after I finished, and what's wrong? And they didn't look happy, you know. And I said, what's wrong? He said, so the interpreter comes and he says, they're trying to absorb how a white man could be cleaning toilets. Because every white person they've ever seen has immense wealth in their view. I mean, you know, the average house in America is what, $220,000 now. It's probably less now, but that's 700 years of income in Kenya, which is one of the best economies in Africa. So you think about, you know, you spend $50 on a phone, you think, wow, that's, you know, big deal. Even if you know, that's expensive, but I can handle it. $50 is 2 weeks' income. So that would be like, and I've seen team visitors do that. They'll buy stuff for people in the village. They're spreading out a little money, not realizing that, you know, $50 in Western Kenya is equivalent to $2,000 in America. It just shatters the balance of that economy in that community. There's a real fragile state economic process that goes on there. It's why most of our programs, one of the reasons most of our programs don't work. In this particular case, because being out of money and emotionally exhausted and ready to quit and everything, I just said, you know, I don't know what to do. I said, I don't know how to clean a hut. It's made out of mud and manure. I don't know how to put a sanitation system into a community that doesn't have any running water, no electricity. 67% of Africans live outside of the communities. 80% of all funding to Africa is unaccounted for. 80% of that or better goes only to the urban areas. Nairobi, Kampala, major cities in, you know, Cape Town. You can tell where the money goes without really having to know. The way that you tell is to get on Google and look up what cities have the best climates in Africa. That's where all the missionaries are. It's where all the NGOs are. It's where all the weather is good. And all at the higher altitudes, better. Nairobi's at 5,000 feet, so it's not like the Sudan where it's 115 degrees on a cool day. And it was, I just had my fill of all of it, you know, that we're all wasting our time here. We should all just leave. And I kind of told him that, you know, I said that. And I said, so we started a little dialogue. Somehow that started. And I said, you know, I'll tell you what. I said, here's what I've seen. I said, I hear these stories as I travel through your villages. And they're stories of hoarding rituals, of their justice system before the colonials came, of their food system, of how they cleaned homes and things. And, you know, there are stories about all these oral, they're just so rich in oral tradition. And I said, I don't know how to do any of these things. I said, do you know how do you clean a home? Tell me how you clean a home. And finally this old widow lady stood up and said, we know how to do all these things. And that's exactly what she said. She said it in English. You just never know, you know. And East Africa is British, so most people will speak English, even out in the villages. Swahili is the trade language, and then they'll have their community language. But she just kind of took off and started listing things, and I started taking notes, and we went on for 3 days. So with me taking notes and them telling me how things should work. So at the end, I'm just puzzled now because by then I'd already begun to see one great lie about Africa, and that's the lie that Africa is just destitute. Because if you landed in Nairobi today, or Abuja, Nigeria, or any city that you could fly into, and you weren't staged, which a lot of donors are, where you're taken from where you land to where they want you to see, to where the project they want you to participate in, and you get sort of this caged view. What you would see is that, and I think this is a very conservative view, 80% of Africans are perfectly healthy. And healthy African is a very healthy person. They don't have all the support system that we have. There's a huge problem with child mortality. But an adult African, the average age throughout Africa is about 48 years, 27 years in some areas. But if you reach the age of 40, this is true anywhere in the world, by the way, the chances of you living as long as any American are exactly the same. So it's the child mortality that sets the lifespan back. And also shows you how little progress we've made with geriatrics, because the statistics around the world for people reaching the age of 40 are the same, no matter what kind of culture you live in, except for access to medical health care. So anyway, so I took all these notes and I kind of stayed a while and I wrote this little program I called Village Care, and we started Village Care. And I got 30 or 40 of these women to participate, and I left. I said, I'll tell you what, I'm leaving, so I'll come back. And if you'll do the things that you committed to do, because they all said there were things they could do. We made this rule together. And the rule was this, that you couldn't take any outside money, and you could only use the resources you have in your own community. That was the rule. That was the only rule we had. You could do whatever you want to do. And we came up with 5, I'd actually come up with these 5 things before, but we structured what they came up with into the 5 things that I had designed about 5 years earlier. When I first went, I saw that there are elements to all healthy communities all over the world. There's 5 universal elements: sanitation, nutrition, healthcare, education, economic security. In order to be healthy, any community in the world has to have those 5 things. Now you notice I don't put road building in there, and there's nothing about housing or any of that stuff. Some of that comes out of those 5 things, but some of it we can't do anything about. Like what I realized by then for certain is that I couldn't conquer the corruption of Africa. It's so incredibly immensely corrupt, even today, that it's unbelievable. And I can't fix that. And I can't fix the roads. The Africans took all of their money and sent it to Europe, which is where most aid money goes, is to the Swiss bank system. And still does to this day, even though the language is all much pleasanter.
The Africans send aid money to
Africa, understand what aid, and the book defines this really well, but understand what aid money does. USAID, and Village Care, by the way, is USAID, one of the very few USAID PVO approved organizations. They like us. We don't particularly like them. But when the United States or any other country gives funding in aid to a country, they're buying an alliance. They're intentionally not monitoring the results of those programs. Of course, they say they do, but they absolutely do not, will not, and cannot, because that's not the purpose of the money. The money buys alliances. And it really started at the end of the colonial period, which is about 1953 to 63. The African nations are given their independence. And immediately you have the emergence during that same period of the Cold War between America and, the real technological emergence of the Cold War between the US and USSR. So what are we doing? We're competing with them. We're trying to buy friends, and so are they. So immediately after their independence, billions of dollars are just shoved into Africa to either make them a Western nation or a communist country. And with the exodus of the British, the French, and the Germans, and the rest of the groups, no plan for an exodus system. There's no transition period. There's no training. There's just, hey, we're here today, gone tomorrow. There was some compensatory money paid by the major European countries that let go of their colonial territories. So more money is dumped into those economies. U.S. comes in, we're dumping more money, and nobody's monitoring any of the money. And there's been no training for any new leadership to emerge. And against those odds, for about 10 years, things went really well. There was almost a golden age until about mid-70s, where things just really flowered in Africa. And then as leaders emerged, you had the rise of Idi Amin and a dozen others around Africa who really corrupted the process. They just saw that, they realized, I think, that none of these funds and that none of these systems were being monitored. Nobody's out to measure how thick the asphalt is on the road they're building. And, you know, absolute power corrupts, money corrupts, and it completely corrupted the entire continent. So, that money goes in and goes right back out again. The wealthy in Africa are very wealthy.
So it goes into Europe.